She laughed right in the middle of the Tuscan villa, raising her Prosecco high as she announced, I was too broke to even step foot in Italy. Then she shoved a seating chart into my hand and told me the staff needed to hurry up. I looked at the paper, then up at the ancient stone gate. I just smiled because the owner listed on the contract for her $60,000 wedding was actually me. My name is Claire White. And if you looked at my resume, you would see a very boring, very stable career in risk management at Greyfield Holdings. You would see a 36-year-old woman who wears charcoal suits, keeps her hair in a tight bun, and speaks only when necessary. You would see someone practical, someone reliable, someone who supposedly counts pennies because she lacks the imagination to spend them, but standing here, with the Tuscan sun beating down on the terracotta roof tiles of Villa Sant'Elia, none of that mattered. The smell of wet limestone was thick in my nose. It was a heavy mineral scent, grounded and old. I wiped my forehead with the back of my hand, leaving a streak of gray dust across my skin. My work shirt, a simple white linen button-down, was damp with sweat and stained with grime. 10 minutes ago, the main breaker for the west wing had tripped due to the sudden afternoon storm that had rolled through the valley. The local electrician was an hour away in Florence, and the caterers were screaming about the refrigeration units. So, I had gone down into the spider-infested, stone-walled utility cellar and fixed it myself. I knew the wiring of this villa better than I knew the veins in my own hands. I knew that the third fuse from the left was temperamental and that the grounding wire needed a specific jiggle to reconnect. I emerged from the service stairwell, blinking against the sudden brightness of the late afternoon light. The storm had passed, leaving the sky a bruised purple and gold, the kind of light that painters spent lifetimes trying to capture. I was exhausted. My knuckles were scraped. I wanted a shower, and I wanted a very strong espresso. Instead, I walked straight into a performance. The central courtyard of the villa was a masterpiece of Renaissance architecture, framed by arched loggias and lined with manicured cypress trees that stood like silent sentries. In the center, around the 16th-century stone fountain, the party was in full swing. This was the welcome cocktail, the kickoff event for what my sister, Lila, had been calling the event of the century. Lila stood near the fountain. She looked radiant. I had to give her that. She was wearing a cream-colored silk dress that caught the light, holding a crystal flute of Prosecco as if it were a scepter. She was 29, 7 years my junior, and she had spent every single one of those years perfecting the art of being looked at. Around her, a cluster of guests laughed at something she had just said. These were the beautiful people, the friends of Owen Kensington, the groom, the hangers-on, the people who posted photos of their lattes that cost more than my hourly wage used to be. I stopped at the edge of the portico. I should have turned back. I should have used the servants' entrance behind the kitchen to get to my quarters. But I was tired, and I was thirsty, and frankly, I was already here. Lila's eyes snapped to me. It was instinctual, a predator spotting movement in the grass. Her smile didn't falter, but the temperature of it changed. It went from warm and inviting to something sharp, something that cut. She saw the limestone dust on my cheek. She saw the sweat-dampened hair escaping my clip. She saw the heavy work boots I was wearing instead of heels. She didn't greet me. She didn't ask why I looked like I had been wrestling with a generator. Instead, she raised her glass higher, drawing the attention of the 20 or so people closest to her. She laughed right in the middle of the villa courtyard, a bright, tinkling sound that echoed off the stone walls. "Look at her," she announced, her voice carrying perfectly over the low hum of jazz music. "Claire is too broke to even step foot in Italy properly." The laughter that followed was ragged, confused at first, then compliant. The guests didn't know who I was, but they knew the bride was making a joke. So they laughed. It was the social currency of the wedding weekend. You laugh when the bride laughs. Lila turned fully toward me, her expression mocking. She gestured to my clothes, to the dirt on my pants. "I told you all she was struggling," Lila continued, playing to her audience. "She had to hitch a ride with the cargo transport just to get here. Can you imagine?" She turned back to her friends, lowering her voice in a stage whisper that was meant to be heard. She is doing some work to pay for her ticket. Poor thing. It is tragic. Really. I stood there, frozen, not out of shame, but out of a sheer, cold disbelief at her audacity. I had expected her to ignore me. I had expected her to perhaps make a snide comment in private. But this was public theater. Then I felt a gaze that was heavier than the rest. Vivian Kensington was standing near the buffet table, holding a plate of fig and prosciutto crostini but not eating. Owen's mother, the matriarch of the Kensington Empire. She was a woman made of steel and pearls. She wore a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than my first car. And her hair was a helmet of silver perfection. She wasn't laughing. Vivian Kensington did not laugh at jokes she deemed low class, and she certainly didn't laugh at staff. She looked at me, her eyes sweeping from my muddy boots to my dirty face. It was a look of absolute, terrifying assessment. She was appraising my value and finding it negative. "Who is she?" Vivian asked. Her voice was low, crisp, and devoid of warmth. She didn't ask me. She asked Lila. Lila didn't miss a beat. She stepped over to her future mother-in-law, looping her arm through Vivian's. "Oh, don't worry about her." "Vivian," Lila said, her voice dripping with honey. "She is just someone who handles the odd jobs here. You know, plunging toilets, fixing lights. Just the help. Just the help." The words hung in the humid air. I looked at Owen, who was standing a few feet away, nursing a bourbon. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. But he didn't say anything. He didn't correct her. He just looked down at his drink, choosing the path of least resistance, which was exactly why Lila had chosen him. I could have spoken. I could have walked into the center of that circle, wiped the limestone dust from my hands, and introduced myself as the owner of the Villa Santalia. I could have told them that the only reason their Prosecco was cold was because I had just spent 20 minutes in a crawl space. I could have told Vivian that the $60,000 venue fee her son had paid had gone directly into a holding company that bore my signature, but I didn't. My training in risk management kicked in. When you are assessing a volatile situation, you do not add fuel, you observe, you gather data, you wait for the market to crash, and then you buy. I lowered my head, playing the role she had cast me in. I let my shoulders slump slightly, feigning the embarrassment they expected to see. "I am sorry to disturb," I mumbled, keeping my voice low. I turned to a passing waiter, a young man named Marco, who I had hired myself 3 seasons ago. His eyes widened when he saw me, and he opened his mouth to say, "Signora White," but I shot him a sharp look. He closed his mouth, confused, and I took a glass of water from his tray. "Thank you," I whispered. I retreated to the edge of the courtyard, stepping into the long, cool shadow of a cypress tree. From here, I was invisible. I was just part of the scenery, like the statues or the ivy. I took a long drink of water, washing the taste of dust from my throat. My heart was beating a steady, slow rhythm against my ribs. It wasn't racing. It was the calm thud of a predator waiting in the grass. Lila had moved on. The moment was over for her. She had scored her points, humiliated the sister she despised, and now she was back to being the star. She was holding court, gesturing expansively at the villa around her. "Isn't it just magical?" I heard her say. Her voice carried easily to my hiding spot. Owen and I fell in love with this place the moment we saw it online. We knew we had to have it. Vivian was still skeptical. I could see it in the set of her jaw. "It is certainly remote," Vivian said, "and expensive. I hope you are staying within the budget Owen discussed." Lila laughed again, waving her hand dismissively. "Money is just energy. Vivian, besides, after the wedding, we are going to keep this place." I choked slightly on my water. I lowered the glass, staring at my sister's back. "Excuse me," Vivian asked, her eyebrows shooting up. "Keep it?" "Yes," Lila beamed. "We have been talking to the owners. They love us. They said we are the perfect couple to represent the brand. We are going to keep it as a private retreat. You know, for the family. We will practically own it." She was lying. She was lying with such ease, such fluidity, that it was almost impressive. There had been no talks. There was no they. There was only me. And I hadn't spoken to Lila in 6 months before this week. She was selling a fantasy to the Kensingtons. She was selling them access to a lifestyle she didn't have, promising them a villa she couldn't afford to rent for a week, let alone own. She was leveraging an asset that belonged to me to buy her way into their family. My eyes drifted to a small side table near the entrance of the loggia. The wedding coordinator, a frantic woman named Elena, who I had worked with for years, had left her clipboard there while she ran to deal with the caterers. I glanced around. No one was looking at the woman in the dirty shirt. I slipped out of the shadows and walked over to the table. I picked up the clipboard, pretending to tidy the stack of napkins next to it. The top sheet was the master schedule, but underneath that was the client contact sheet. Bride Lila White, groom Owen Kensington. Contact email Lila, White, management gmail.com. I frowned. That wasn't Lila's email. Lila's email had been Lila, Sparkle since she was 16, and then Lila. Official when she started her failed modeling career. I flipped the page to the billing section. Billing contact approvals Villa Santelia Events.com. I froze. HTTPS. Google.com. Search. Qa Villa Santelia Events.com was not my domain. My domain was simply yes. Google.com's search. Qa Villa Santelia.com. I looked closer at the document. It was a printed invoice confirmation. It looked official. It had the logo. It had the font. But the routing number at the bottom, I didn't recognize it. And the approval signature at the bottom, the one that was supposed to be from the owner's representative, was a scrawl I had never seen before. Someone was intercepting the communications. Someone had set up a fake email to approve requests that I would never have agreed to. And looking at Lila, glowing in the center of the courtyard, lying about owning the place, the pieces clicked into place with a sickening thud. She wasn't just lying to the Kensingtons, she was running a scam. She was creating a paper trail to make it look like she had authority here. Vivian Kensington was listening to Lila with a new expression now. It wasn't warmth, but it was interest, greed. The idea of exclusive access to a historic Tuscan property was appealing to a woman who collected real estate like playing cards. Lila, Vivian said, her voice softer. If you have that kind of relationship with the owners, that changes things. It changes everything. Lila confirmed, smiling like the cat who got the cream. I put the clipboard back down, exactly as I had found it. My hand was steady. I looked at the ancient stone gate that had stood for 400 years. I looked at the line of cypress trees that I paid a fortune to maintain against the blight. I looked at my sister, who had just told the world I was too poor to be here, while she stood on the ground that I owned. She thought she was the main character. She thought this was her stage. She thought I was just a prop, a bit of background poverty to make her wealth shine brighter. I took one last look at them, the beautiful people, the fake smiles, the stolen glory. I turned and walked toward the servants' entrance, my heavy boots making no sound on the stone. Keep acting, Lila, I thought, a cold, hard smile touching my lips for the first time that day. Keep building your castle in the sky, because I am about to pull the curtain and watch the whole thing come crashing down. The hot water of the shower in the owner's suite washed away the limestone dust, but it could not wash away the cold clarity that had settled in my chest. I stood there for a long time, letting the steam fill the bathroom, a space tiled in hand-painted ceramic that I had personally selected 3 years ago from an artisan in Bologna. Most people describe me as difficult. My mother, Diane, usually phrased it as cold. My father, Mark, preferred the term intense. In the corporate offices of Grayfield Holdings, where I spent 60 hours a week analyzing market volatility and operational hazards, my colleagues called me a machine. They were not entirely wrong. I hated noise. I hated inefficiency. I hated the messy, sprawling chaos of unchecked emotions. I liked spreadsheets because they did not lie. I liked contracts because they had boundaries. I was good at my job because I could look at a disaster and see only the math required to fix it. That was why I was silent downstairs. That was why I did not throw my drink in Lila's face or scream at Vivian Kensington. An emotional reaction is a liability. It creates a smokescreen that obscures the real data. And right now, the data was telling me something terrifying. My silence was a habit formed over 3 decades of being the other white sister, the reliable one, the one who did not need to be worried about. Growing up, the dynamic in the White household was as fixed as a law of physics. Lila was the sun, burning bright and hot, demanding gravity. I was the rock, expected to sit still and endure the heat. If Lila broke a vase, it was because I had left it too close to the edge. If Lila failed a math test, it was because I had not tutored her well enough. The phrase, "You are the older sister," was not a statement of fact. It was a sentence of servitude. "Be the bigger person," my mother would say. Usually while signing a check to cover one of Lila's mistakes. "She is sensitive. Claire, you are strong. You can handle it." So I handled it. I handled her parking tickets. I handled her credit card overages when she maxed out her limits buying designer handbags she could not afford. I handled the rent on her apartment in the city when she decided to quit her job because the manager did not understand her creative vision. I became her safety net, woven from my own savings and sanity. That stopped 5 years ago. It was a Tuesday. I remember it clearly because I was reviewing a quarterly audit. Lila called, hysterical, needing $5,000 to cover a deposit on a trip to Tulum with some influencers she was trying to impress. She was crying, saying it was her big break, her chance to network. I said no. It was the first time I had truly closed the vault. I realized then that I was not helping her. I was financing her delusion. I was paying for her to remain a child. The fallout was nuclear. My parents called me selfish. They called me cruel. Lila told everyone who would listen that I was jealous of her freedom, that I was a bitter corporate drone who wanted to drag her down to my miserable level. That was when the narrative started. The story that Claire was stingy, the story that Claire was struggling. It was easier for Lila to tell people I was too broke to help her than to admit I had simply decided she was a bad investment. I let them believe it. It was quieter that way. If they thought I was broke, they stopped asking for money. It was around that time that I found the Villa Santalia. I did not buy this place because I wanted a romantic Italian getaway. I bought it because I saw a distressed asset with excellent fundamentals. The previous owner was a count with a gambling problem and a crumbling roof. The property was bleeding money. I negotiated the deal aggressively, purchasing the deed through a layered structure of limited liability companies. On paper, the villa is owned by a generic entity called VSE Holdings, registered in Delaware. My name appears nowhere on the public records. To my family, I am just a risk manager who travels to Europe frequently for boring conferences. I tell them I stay in corporate hotels. I tell them I spend my days in boardrooms. I never told them that I spent my weekends supervising the restoration of 16th century frescoes or arguing with landscape architects about the pH levels of the soil for the cypress trees. Keeping the villa a secret was my one true act of self-preservation. It was the one thing Lila could not touch. It was the one thing my parents could not guilt me into sharing. It was mine. But Lila has a nose for value, even if she does not understand the cost. She had stumbled upon the Villa Santalia online 6 months ago. I remember the day she sent the link to the family group chat, raving about this hidden gem in Tuscany. I had nearly dropped my phone. I watched in silence as she spun a fantasy about getting married here. I assumed she would look at the price tag and move on. The rental fee alone is enough to buy a luxury car. Then Owen Kensington entered the picture. Owen is nice. That is the best and worst thing you can say about him. He is the son of old money, a man who has never had to fight for anything, and therefore does not know how to protect anything. He loves Lila because she makes him feel alive. She is colorful and dramatic, and he is beige. He is her ticket to the life she believes she deserves. He is the funding for the movie she is directing in her head. For Lila, this wedding is not a celebration of love. It is a coronation. It is her way of proving to every girl who was mean to her in high school, every ex-boyfriend who dumped her, and mostly to me, that she has won. She needs the $60,000 venue. She needs the exclusive Italian backdrop. She needs to prove that she is not just the girl who borrows money. She is the girl who owns the view. But today, standing in the courtyard, I realized it had gone beyond simple vanity. Lila is not just renting the villa. She is claiming it. The fake email address on the clipboard was the key. Approvals at villasantaliaevents.com. She had created a mirror world. She was approving her own requests. She was likely intercepting the real invoices from my management team, doctoring them, and presenting false numbers to Owen and Vivian. Why the answer was simple and pathetic. She was trying to bridge the gap between the budget Vivian had given her and the fantasy she wanted to live. Vivian is a shark. She would have scrutinized every line item. If Lila wanted to open the antique wine cellar, a service we charged $10,000 for, she couldn't ask Vivian for the money, so she faked an approval. She told herself she would figure it out later. She probably told herself she could charm the staff, or bully them, or that once the wine was open, no one would dare take it back. But the comment about keeping the villa chilled me more than the theft. Lila is delusional enough to believe her own lies. She thinks that if she acts like the owner long enough, reality will bend to fit her script. She thinks she can marry into the Kensington family and then use their leverage to muscle into my property. She thinks she can force a sale. Or perhaps she has told them she is already a silent partner. If I had spoken up in the courtyard, if I had screamed, "I own this," right then, I would have lost. Lila would have cried. She would have played the victim. She would have said I was ruining her special day out of jealousy. My parents would have rushed to her side, claiming I was making up lies to humiliate her. Owen would have looked at me like I was a monster. Even Vivian might have dismissed me as a hysterical relative causing a scene. In risk management, you do not fire the flare until you have the rescue boat secured. I needed indisputable proof. I needed to let the trap snap shut so tightly that she could not wiggle out of it with tears or tantrums. I needed her to commit fully to the fraud. I needed her to sign her name to it. I stepped out of the shower and wrapped a thick, white towel around myself. The fabric was soft, high-quality Egyptian cotton, embroidered with the crest of the villa, my crest. I walked to the window of the suite, looking down at the courtyard below. The party was breaking up. I could see the tiny figure of Lila, still holding court, still waving her hands. She looked small from up here. She had spent her whole life taking from me. She took my parents' attention. She took my money. She took my peace. Now, she wanted to take my sanctuary. She wanted to turn my hard work into her stage prop. I went to my desk and opened my laptop. The screen glowed blue in the dim room. I logged into the secure server for the villa's administration. I pulled up the real contract, the one signed by Owen Kensington 6 months ago. Then I opened a fresh document and started a log. Incident 1. Unauthorized verbal claim of ownership. Incident 2. Discovery of fraudulent domain and email routing. Incident 3. Hostile interaction with staff. Me. I typed with steady, rhythmic strokes. Lila wanted a show. I would give her one, but the ending was not going to be the one she had written. She thought I was the broke sister, the failure, the extra in her movie. She forgot that the person who owns the theater controls the lights. I picked up my phone and dialed Elena. My operations manager. "Elena," I said when she answered, keeping my voice flat and professional. "Claire, where are you? The bride is driving us crazy. She just demanded we move the lemon trees again. Let her move them." I said, "Let her do whatever she wants. But I want you to document every single request, every change, every bottle of wine she orders that isn't on the original manifest." And Elena, "Yes. If she asks to sign for anything, let her. Don't argue. Just get her signature." There was a pause on the other end. Elena knew me well. She knew that tone. "Understood," Elena said. I hung up. I looked at the reflection of myself in the dark window. I didn't look like a victim anymore. I looked like a CEO preparing for a hostile takeover. My parents were down there, probably toasting to Lila's success, probably making excuses for my absence. "Claire is tired," they would say. "Claire isn't very social." They were wrong. I wasn't tired. I was just waiting. I closed the laptop. The game had changed. It wasn't about saving money anymore. It was about teaching a lesson that should have been learned 20 years ago in a sandbox. You do not take what isn't yours, and you certainly do not insult the landlord while you are standing in her house. Tomorrow, the real billing cycle would begin, and the currency wouldn't be dollars or euros. It would be the one thing Lila valued most in the world, her reputation. I lay down on the bed, staring at the ceiling frescoes of cherubs and clouds. They looked peaceful. I felt peaceful. Let her laugh for one more night, I whispered to the empty room, because tomorrow, the bill comes due. The administrative office of the Villa Santalia was tucked away behind the main kitchen, a windowless room that smelled faintly of ozone from the server racks and dried lavender from the potpourri bowl on the desk. It was the brain of the operation, starkly different from the romantic, sun-drenched facade we sold to the public. Here, there were no frescoes, only filing cabinets. There was no jazz music, only the low, steady hum of the cooling fans keeping the security system alive. I closed the heavy oak door behind me and locked it. Elena Rinaldi was sitting at the main desk, surrounded by a fortress of paper. She looked up, her eyes wide and rimmed with red. Elena was a brilliant operator, a woman who could coordinate 3 weddings in a single weekend without breaking a sweat. But today she looked like she had been defusing a bomb that was ticking faster than she could cut the wires. She started to stand up, smoothing her skirt. "Senora White," she said, her voice tight. "I did not expect you down here so soon. I thought you were resting." I pulled up a chair and sat opposite her. I did not lean back. I kept my posture rigid, my hands folded on the edge of the desk. "I am not resting." "Elena," I said, "I am auditing." Elena flinched. In our line of work, an audit usually meant someone had made a mistake that cost money. "I need to see the approval chain for the Kensington event," I stated, specifically the communications regarding the add-ons, the flowers, the extended lighting hours, and whatever is happening with the wine cellar. Elena let out a breath that was half sigh, half groan. She spun her monitor around so I could see the screen. "It has been a nightmare. Claire," she confessed, "the requests come in at all hours. We try to push back, citing the standard contract, but then we get these override approvals." She pointed a manicured finger at the screen. "Look, this came in 2 days ago." I leaned in. It was an email thread. The subject line read, "Urgent authorization for Class A wine access." The body of the email was curt and professional. It read, "Please grant the wedding party full access to the lower cellar for the duration of the cocktail hour. The owner has agreed to waive the corkage and vintage fees as a personal gift to the couple. Proceed immediately." I looked at the sender's name. It said Claire White, Executive Office. Then I looked at the email address. C. White of Villa Santalia. Management. Calm. My blood ran cold, but my face remained impassive. My actual email address, the one I used for all high-level directives, was simply white https. Google.com, search Qua Villa Santalia.com. There was no hyphen. There was no management. This was not a simple misunderstanding. This was not a bride getting carried away. This was fraud. I scrolled down. There were dozens of them. Approvals for extra security personnel. Approvals to unlock the private chapel which we usually kept closed for preservation reasons. Approvals to use the antique silver service that was museum quality and strictly for display. Whoever registered this domain? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. When did they do it? Elena clicked a few keys, bringing up the metadata. 3 months ago, right after the initial deposit cleared. I stared at the screen. Lila had planned this. She had bought a domain name that sounded legitimate enough to fool my staff, set up a fake email account in my name, and had been approving her own extravagant demands for 90 days. She knew I was a silent owner. She knew I rarely communicated directly with the ground staff about day-to-day wedding details, usually leaving it to the general manager. She had exploited the very gap I had created to protect my privacy. It was brilliant. in a sociopathic sort of way. Is there more? I asked. Elena nodded, looking terrified. She pulled a thick binder from the stack. This is the hard copy file. The bride, Miss White, she has been handing us physical addendums. She says she spoke to you on the phone. She says you are sisters, so the paperwork is just a formality. I opened the binder. The first page was the base contract. $60,000. That was the number Lila bragged about. That was the number Owen had paid. It covered the rental of the grounds, standard catering for 100 guests, and basic floral arrangements. I flipped the page. There was a change order for imported white peacocks to roam the gardens during the reception. Estimated cost $4,000. I flipped again. A request to replace all the standard linen napkins with hand-embroidered silk from a specific atelier in Como. Estimated cost $6,000. I kept flipping. The numbers were staggering. But then my hand stopped on a document near the back. It was a liability waiver for the wine cellar. The text was standard, but the handwritten note in the margin made my stomach drop. Groom's family to have open selection rights. No inventory count necessary per agreement with C. I looked up at Elena. Did you open the cellar? Elena nodded slowly. We unlocked the main gate an hour ago. The groom's mother, Mrs. Kensington, wanted to inspect the vintage selection. She took 3 bottles of the 1990 Brunello up to her room to sample. I closed my eyes for a brief second. 3 bottles of 1990 Brunello di Montalcino. That was roughly $5,000 of inventory gone in an hour, and the note said, no inventory count necessary. Lila was not just throwing a party. She was looting the place. She was stripping the assets of the villa to feed the ego of her mother-in-law. I stood up and walked over to the bank of security monitors on the far wall. The screens showed various angles of the property in high definition. I saw the caterers prepping in the kitchen. I saw the florists frantically arranging hydrangeas by the altar. And then I saw the feed from Camera 4, the library. Lila was there. She was with a group of 4 women bridesmaids, judging by the matching silk robes. She was holding a glass of my wine, gesturing to the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with first editions. I turned up the volume on the console. The audio feed was slightly tinny, but clear enough, and we are thinking of turning this room into a nursery eventually, Lila was saying. Her voice was authoritative, proprietary. We will have to move these old books out. Of course, they smell a bit musty. Owen wants to put a modern media center on that wall. One of the bridesmaids gasped. Oh, Lila, you are so lucky. This place is huge. It is a lot of responsibility. Lila sighed, acting the burden of the landed gentry. But family property is sacred. We have to preserve the legacy. I watched her touch the spine of a leather-bound history of Tuscany that was printed in 1850. She tapped it with her fingernail, dismissive and ignorant of its value. She was selling them a future that did not exist, using my past to pay for it. I turned back to Elena. The manager was watching me, waiting for me to explode, waiting for me to tell her to shut it down, to call the police, to march out there and scream. Instead, I sat back down at the desk. I opened the drawer and pulled out a fresh, black ledger. I placed it in the center of the desk. Elena, I said, I want you to listen to me very carefully. Yes, Signora, you are not to stop her. Elena blinked. Excuse me, you are not to block any requests. If she wants the peacocks, you get the peacocks. If she wants to open the 1982 Barolo, you bring up the crate. If she wants to repave the driveway with gold leaf, you call the contractor and get a quote. But the cost? Elena stammered. I tapped the black ledger. We are going to document everything. From this moment on, every single item that falls outside the base contract of $60,000 gets entered into this book. Every bottle of wine, every silk napkin, every hour of overtime for the staff. I opened the ledger to the first page and wrote the date at the top. And here is the most important part. I continued, my voice steady and cold. You will print a physical invoice for every single one of these items, and you will make Lila sign it. Elena looked confused. But she has been forging the approvals. She will just sign it and think she is getting away with it. Exactly. I said, I want her signature. I want her hand on the pen. I want her to physically acknowledge every single debt she is accruing. If she thinks she is the owner, treat her like the owner. Owners sign checks. Owners sign liabilities. I looked back at the screen where Lila was talking about ripping out my library. She thinks this is a game. Elena. She thinks she has found a cheat code where she gets everything for free because she is clever enough to fake an email. She thinks money is just a concept. I picked up a pen and wrote the first entry in the ledger, 3 bottles. Brunello di Montalcino, 1990. Unauthorized removal. Next to it, I wrote the market price. We are going to let her eat. I said, we are going to let her feast. We are going to give her the best wedding Tuscany has ever seen. I looked at Elena, and for the first time, she saw the shark that lived beneath my calm exterior. And when the bill is so high that she cannot possibly pay it, when the weight of it is enough to crush her, that is when we present it. Elena nodded, understanding dawning on her face. She sat up straighter. She was no longer just a stressed wedding planner. She was now an accomplice in a sting operation. What about the email address, she asked. Should we block it? No. I said, keep it active. Reply to it. Confirm the requests. Let her think the system is working perfectly. Let her feel safe. The safer she feels, the more reckless she will become. I stood up. I had to get back to my room before anyone noticed I had been gone too long. I needed to put on my plain dress and go sit at the staff table and look miserable. I needed to play my part. One more thing, I said, pausing at the door. Yes, Senora. Make sure the credit card terminals are fully updated and connected to the main banking line. We are going to need them to work very fast tomorrow. I walked out of the office and back into the humidity of the corridor. The air smelled of roasting rosemary and garlic from the kitchen, rich and heavy. I walked past the open door of the wine cellar. I could hear voices inside Vivian Kensington and her husband, discussing the tannins of a vintage I had been saving for my own retirement. It is exquisite, I heard Vivian say. Lila really has pulled out all the stops. I had no idea her family had assets like this. I paused in the shadows, listening. We should have the lawyers look at the deed structure after the honeymoon, her husband replied, his voice low. If we are going to invest in renovations, we need to make sure Owen's name is on the title. I smiled in the dark. They were already carving up the carcass before they had even checked if the animal was dead. I continued up the stairs. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a notification from the security system. Motion detected in the master suite. I checked the feed on my phone. It wasn't my suite. It was the corridor leading to it. Lila was standing outside the door to my private apartment, the one part of the villa that was strictly off-limits, even to guests. She was trying the handle. It was locked. Of course. She rattled it, frustrated. Then kicked the bottom of the door with her white heel. I watched her on the small screen. She looked feral for a second, her mask slipping. She wanted in. She wanted everything. Go ahead. Lila. I thought, kick the door. Sign the papers. Drink the wine. You are not building a legacy. You are digging a grave. And I'm just here to hand you the shovel. The sun began to dip below the Tuscan hills, casting long, bruised shadows across the terracotta tiles of the villa. The air grew cooler, but the heat inside the operations of Villa Santalia was rising. I stood in the small alcove near the kitchen service entrance, my phone pressed to my ear, watching the staff scurry back and forth with trays of hors d'oeuvres. I was speaking to Giovanni, my legal counsel in Milan. He was a man who cost €600 an hour and was worth every cent because he didn't ask moral questions. He only asked for documentation. So, to clarify, Giovanni's voice crackled over the line, smooth and unbothered. You want the papers drawn up for immediate contract termination based on fraudulent misrepresentation, but you do not want to serve them yet. Correct, I said, keeping my voice low. I need 2 sets of documents. Giovanni, one is a standard cease and desist for intellectual property theft regarding the domain name. The second is a breach of contract notice with a demand for immediate payment of all outstanding liabilities. I need them ready to be executed by tomorrow morning at 8. It is aggressive, Giovanni noted. If we execute the second one, the wedding stops. The Carabinieri could be involved if the debt is significant. The debt is significant, I replied, watching a waiter carry a tray of truffle arancini that cost €3 a bite. And it is growing by the minute. Just have the papers ready. I will give the signal. I hung up and slipped the phone into the pocket of my slacks. I had changed out of my work clothes into a plain navy dress. It was well made, but deliberately unassuming. The kind of thing a high-end staff member might wear. It allowed me to blend in, to be present without being acknowledged. Elena approached me, her clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. She looked harried. "She is at it again," Elena whispered. "She just requested a second band, a jazz quartet for the cocktail transition before the reception. She says the DJ isn't classy enough for the sunset hour." "Cost?" I asked. €2,500 for a rush booking. "They have to drive in from Siena." "Approve it," I said instantly. "But the rule stands, Elena, double confirmation. Get the request in writing on the addendum form and make sure she signs it, then log it in the system." "She is signing everything without even reading it," Elena said, shaking her head. "She is just waving her hand and saying, 'Handle it. It's family money. It feels wrong.'" "It is not wrong," I corrected her, my voice hard. "It is a transaction. She is buying a service. We are providing it. The fact that she cannot afford it is not our operational concern until the bill is due. Go." I walked out into the courtyard. The atmosphere had shifted. The casual welcome vibes were morphing into something more frantic, more performative. Lila was moving through the crowd like a manic hummingbird. She was directing the florists to rearrange the imported white roses, thousands of them, because she felt they looked too sparse near the fountain. More volume. I heard her snap at a florist. "I want it to look like an explosion of petals. Cost is not an issue. Just get more from the cooler." There were no more roses in the cooler. To fulfill that request, the florist would have to strip the arrangements from the guest rooms or call a supplier for an emergency delivery at triple the price. I watched the florist look at Elena, saw Elena give a subtle nod, and then saw the florist pull out her phone to make the expensive call. I moved toward the perimeter, checking the security stations. I had instructed the team to be invisible but absolute. No one crashed this party, but more importantly, no one left without passing a checkpoint. I wanted the perimeter sealed. Owen was standing near the bar, looking less like a groom and more like a man waiting for a biopsy result. He was checking his phone constantly. He would take a sip of his drink, type something rapidly, frown, and then put the phone away, only to check it again 30 seconds later. I knew that look. That was the look of a man moving money around. He was transferring funds between accounts, trying to cover pending charges, watching balances drop faster than he anticipated. The $60,000 wedding was likely pushing $100,000 by now, and the night hadn't even truly begun. He looked up and saw me. For a second, relief washed over his face. As if seeing a familiar face, even mine, was a comfort. Then he remembered who I was. The broke sister. The failure. The one who needed charity. The relief vanished, replaced by a polite, strained smile. "Claire," he said as I got closer, "I didn't think you'd be around." "I am just making sure everything runs smoothly," I said. It wasn't a lie. "Right. Good." He shifted his weight. "Lila is really going all out, isn't she? It is quite a production." "It certainly is," I agreed. "Are you holding up okay? You look a bit stressed." He gave a tight laugh. "Oh, weddings. The hidden costs always get you. But Lila says she has it handled. She says the venue is practically gifting us these upgrades because of the family connection." He looked at me with a hint of desperation, begging me to confirm the lie. He wanted me to tell him that yes, the thousands of extra roses and the vintage wine and the jazz quartet were all freebies because the owners loved us so much. I looked him in the eye. "Lila has a very vivid imagination." "Owen," he frowned, confusion clouding his features. Before he could ask what I meant, a commotion at the main gate drew our attention. My parents had arrived. Mark and Diane White stepped out of a hired Mercedes van, not the luxury sedan Lila had undoubtedly envisioned for them, but a practical choice I assumed my father had insisted on to save €50. They looked out of place against the backdrop of Tuscan stone and cypress. My mother was wearing a dress that was too bright, a floral print better suited for a Florida brunch than an Italian evening. My father looked uncomfortable in his tuxedo, tugging at his collar. Lila shrieked a sound of pure performance and rushed over to them. "Mommy, Daddy, you made it." I stayed back, watching the reunion. It was nauseatingly theatrical. Lila posed for a selfie with them before they had even unloaded their luggage. Then, inevitably, they saw me. My mother's face fell. It wasn't a look of hatred, but of disappointment. It was the look she reserved for stain on a carpet or a chipped plate. She walked over, my father trailing behind her. "Claire," she said, looking me up and down. "Why are you wearing that?" "Wearing what?" I asked, looking down at my navy dress. "You look like staff," she hissed. "You look so plain. This is your sister's big moment. Couldn't you have bought something nicer? I told you I would send you a check if you needed it." "I didn't need a check," I said calmly. "Don't be difficult," my father grumbled. "We just got here. Don't start drama. Claire, we know money is tight for you, but for God's sake, try to look like you belong to the family." "Lila told everyone you barely scraped together the airfare," my mother added, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "It is embarrassing. Claire, people are talking. Just try to stay in the background. Okay, don't make Lila look bad." "Don't make Lila look bad," I repeated, the mantra of my childhood. I looked at them, really looked at them. They weren't evil people. They were just weak. They had spent 30 years buying into Lila's shine because it distracted them from their own mediocrity. They enabled her because her success, even fake success, made them feel successful. And they kept me down because my reality was too stark, too boring, too independent. "I am not the one you should be worried about," I said. "What is that supposed to mean?" my father snapped. "It means," I said, leaning in slightly, "that you are standing in a villa that costs €5,000 a night to rent, drinking wine that costs €200 a bottle, surrounded by flowers that cost more than your car. Do you really think Lila paid for this?" "Owen's family is wealthy," my mother said defensively. "Owen is looking at his banking app every 30 seconds, I countered, "and Lila is signing contracts for things she cannot afford." "She said the owners gave her a discount," my mother cried. "She said she knows them." I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Did she tell you who signed the contract?" "I don't know what you are talking about," my father said, waving his hand. "You are just jealous. You have always been jealous of her spark. Just go help with the bags or something. Make yourself useful." I looked at them one last time. The bridge didn't burn. It just crumbled into dust. "Do you know who is listed as the owner on the contract?" I asked again, softly. They stared at me, blankly. They didn't want to know. They didn't care about the truth. They only cared about the show. "Never mind," I said. "Enjoy the party." I turned and walked away. As I moved toward the terrace, I felt a pair of eyes drilling into my back. Vivian Kensington was sitting on a stone bench near the rose garden, a glass of champagne untouched in her hand. She wasn't looking at the bride. She wasn't looking at the view. She was looking at me. She had seen the interaction with my parents. She had seen the way I stood, the way I didn't flinch when they insulted me. She was a woman who understood power dynamics, and she realized that the dynamic she was witnessing didn't make sense. If I was the broke, pathetic sister, why was I so calm? Why was I not cowering? I met her gaze. I didn't smile. I didn't nod. I just held it for 3 seconds a challenge and then walked past her toward the operations room. Vivian turned her head, following me. I could feel her calculating. She was starting to smell the smoke. I reached the office and slipped inside, the heavy door muting the sounds of the jazz quartet that had just begun to play. The room was cool and quiet. Elena was typing furiously. "Update," I said, walking to the master screen. She just ordered a fleet of vintage Fiats to drive the VIP guests from the ceremony to the reception area, Elena said, her voice trembling slightly. It is a 3-minute walk, Claire, a 3-minute walk through a beautiful garden, but she wants cars. How many? 10, at €400 each per hour. Approve it, I said. Did she sign? She signed, Elena said, holding up a fresh sheet of paper. And Claire, there is something else. What? Elena swiveled the chair to face me. She is in the library again, with the groom's cousins. I have the audio. She pressed a button. Lila's voice filled the small room, tinny but distinct. So the plan is, after the wedding, we are going to open up the calendar for select friends, Lila was saying. Since we have priority status with the venue, we can get you guys in for summer dates that are usually blocked off for years. Just let me know, and I'll talk to the management team. I can probably get you the family rate. I stared at the speaker. She was selling access. She was selling my business. She was promising priority booking to her friends, leveraging a family rate that did not exist, for a property she did not own. She wasn't just stealing a wedding, she was stealing my brand equity. She is promising them dates, Elena whispered. Dates we have already booked for other clients. She is digging a hole so deep she will see the other side of the earth, I murmured. What do we do? Elena asked. If she takes deposits from these people, if she takes money, it becomes criminal fraud. I said, real prison time, not just a lawsuit. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 7:30 in the evening. The rehearsal dinner was in an hour. The wedding was tomorrow morning. Let her talk, I said. Words are just wind, but if you see money change hands, if you see her write a receipt or take a check, you page me immediately. Do not hesitate. Okay, Elena said. And the papers? Giovanni will email them by morning. I said. We are in the end game now. I looked at the monitor. Lila was laughing, throwing her head back, basking in the admiration of the cousins who thought she was the Queen of Tuscany. Enjoy the view. Lila, I thought, it is the last time you will ever see it. Print the ledger update, I told Elena. I want to see the total. Elena hit a key. The printer whirred. A single sheet of paper slid out. I picked it up. Total overage, current 28,450. And the night was still young. Keep logging, I said, and walked back out into the gathering dark. I moved through the villa like a ghost in the machine. The sun had fully set, replaced by the soft, golden glow of the architectural lighting I had installed 2 winters ago to highlight the textured stonework. The air had cooled, carrying the scent of night-blooming jasmine and the expensive perfumes of the guests drifting from the terrace. I wasn't heading to the party. I was heading to the service corridor that ran behind the private dining room, a narrow passage used by staff to clear plates unseen. The walls here were thin, disguised by heavy tapestries on the guest side, but acoustically transparent if you knew where to stand. I pressed my back against the cold stone. Voices drifted through. It is truly a magnificent asset. Lila's voice was clear, confident, dripping with a new kind of arrogance I hadn't heard before. It wasn't just bragging now. It was a pitch. And honestly, Vivian, the management has been lackluster. The family has been too passive with it. The location is undeniably prime, Vivian Kensington replied. Her voice was the sound of a calculator hitting the total button. But passive management is a risk. Who holds the deed currently? You said it was a trust. It is a complex family trust, Lila lied smoothly. My great-uncle bought it in the 50s. Technically, it is split between the siblings. But, well, let's just say Claire isn't interested in the business side. She is just a paper pusher. She manages the books because she likes to feel useful. But she has no real voice in the strategic direction. She would sell her share for a handbag if I offered it. I felt a muscle in my jaw jump. She would sell her share for a handbag. It was such a specific, petty insult, designed to diminish me to the level of a child while elevating herself to the role of the visionary. And you think you can consolidate the ownership? Vivian asked. The skepticism in her voice was waning. replaced by the hunger of an investor sensing a distressed asset. "Oh, absolutely," Lila said. "Once Owen and I are married, we plan to buy out the minority stakeholders, meaning Claire, and really turn this place into something exclusive. A members-only retreat for the circle. No more renting to random tourists. We keep it in the family. We keep it elite." I closed my eyes in the dark corridor. This was the pivot. This was why she was so desperate, why she was spending money she didn't have. She wasn't just trying to impress them. She was trying to close a deal. She was creating the illusion of ownership to bait the Kensingtons into investing in the villa money she would presumably use to pay off the massive debt she was racking up right now. Or perhaps to try and actually buy the place from the owners she had invented. It was a Ponzi scheme built on wedding cake and lies. "If that is the case," Vivian said slowly, "then perhaps we should discuss a partnership structure. The Kensington portfolio could provide the liquidity you need for the buyouts. We could handle the renovations, but I would need to see the papers." "Lila, real papers." "Of course," Lila said, her voice rushing slightly. "I have the preliminary agreements in my suite. I can show you the draft tomorrow, after the ceremony. No need to bore ourselves with legal jargon tonight, right?" "Tomorrow," Vivian agreed, but her tone was firm. After the vows, I pushed myself off the wall. I had heard enough. Lila was trying to sell my house to her mother-in-law. I walked quickly back to the operations office. The air felt heavier now, charged with the static of impending disaster. "Elena," I said as I entered, "pull the payment history for the deposit again. I want to see the credit card authorization forms." Elena looked up from a stack of floral invoices. "The deposit. That cleared 6 months ago. I know. Look at the metadata. Look at the billing address changes." Elena typed rapidly. The screen flickered. "Here," she pointed. "The initial hold was placed on a card ending in 4492. That is Lila's card. But look at the address updates." I leaned in. The billing address had been changed 5 times in 2 days before the payment finally went through. First, it was an address in Brooklyn, Lila's apartment. Then, an address in the Hamptons, presumably a friend's house. Then, an address in Connecticut, the Kensington estate. "She didn't have the funds," I murmured. She was trying different addresses to see if she could trigger an override or bypass the zip code verification on a card that wasn't hers, or she was moving money frantically between accounts to cover the hold. "And look at this," Elena said, highlighting a line in red. "The final payment for the venue fee, the big $60,000, it wasn't a single transaction. It was split." I looked closer. Payment 1, $15,000. Payment 2, $10,000. Payment 3, $35,000. 3 different cards, I realized. She maxed out 3 different cards to pay the base fee. One is definitely Owen's, one is hers, the third is registered to a Mark White, Elena said quietly. "My father." She had drained my father's credit card to pay the final chunk. He probably didn't even know the extent of it. He probably thought he was contributing a few thousand for incidentals, not financing a third of the venue. My phone rang on the desk. It was the vendor line. "Answer it," I said. Elena picked it up. "Villa Santalia operations. Yes, I understand. One moment." She put it on mute and looked at me with wide eyes. "It is the floral supplier in Florence, the one providing the extra white roses she ordered an hour ago. What do they want?" "They are refusing to load the truck. They tried to run the card on file for the rush fee, €4,500, and it declined. They tried it twice." "Declined?" "Insufficient funds," Elena said. "They are asking if we can guarantee the payment. They know you, Claire. They are asking if the villa will backstop the debt." I stared at the phone. This was the moment. If I said no, the flowers wouldn't come. Lila would throw a fit. The illusion would crack. But a crack wasn't enough. I needed a shatter. "Tell them," I said, my voice steady, "that due to the high volume of last-minute changes, all payments must be processed through the central system manually. Tell them to load the truck. Tell them I am personally authorizing the delivery. But the payment will be released only upon a signature of receipt from the client. You want her to sign for the debt knowing the card is dead? Elena asked. I want the debt to exist, I corrected. If the flowers don't come, she just looks incompetent. If the flowers come and she can't pay for them, she is liable for theft of services. Tell them to bring the roses, and tell the driver to bring a physical card reader. Elena nodded and relayed the message. She hung up. They are on their way. I walked over to the window. Down in the courtyard, the jazz quartet was playing a smooth, slow standard. Guests were mingling. I saw Owen standing by the fountain, looking at his phone again. He looked agitated. He was typing a message, then erasing it, then typing again. I decided to go down there. I slipped out the side door and circled around the perimeter, approaching the bar from the shadows. I waited until Owen was alone, signaling for another bourbon. Lovely evening, I said, stepping into the light. Owen jumped slightly. Claire, Jesus, you move quietly. Occupational hazard, I said. Is everything all right? You seem distracted. It is just banks, Owen muttered, rubbing his temples. International transfers are a pain. I am trying to move some funds to cover the band, but the app keeps flagging it as suspicious activity because of the location. The band? I asked innocently. I thought Lila said the owners were covering the upgrades. Owen looked at me, his eyes shifting away. Well, yes, mostly. But there are gratuities and some service fees. Lila said we just need to front it and we will get reimbursed later through the partnership deal. The partnership deal, I repeated. The one for the exclusive membership club. Owen looked surprised. She told you about that. I hear things, I said. It sounds very ambitious. It is brilliant, Owen said, his voice gaining a little enthusiasm. Lila has this vision. You know, she says your family has been sitting on a gold mine. She wants to wake it up. My mother is really interested. She thinks Lila has a real head for business. A head for business? I echoed. Owen, has Lila shown you the deed? The deed. The ownership papers. The trust documents she talks about. Have you ever actually seen your name, or her name, on a legal document regarding this property? Owen laughed, a nervous, dismissive sound. Claire, come on. Why would she lie about that? She is your sister. She says you are just risk-averse, that you don't like change. I love change, I said. When the math works. Look, Owen said, his tone hardening slightly. I know you and Lila have your issues. She told me you might try to dampen the mood. She said you are protective of your little role here as the bookkeeper, but we are trying to build something for the whole family. You should be happy. I am ecstatic, I said deadpan. Suddenly, Lila appeared at Owen's elbow. She must have been watching us. Her smile was tight, her eyes flashing with warning. Claire, she chirped, stop bothering the groom with your boring stories. Owen, honey, the photographer wants a shot of us by the old gate before the light is completely gone. She grabbed his arm, pulling him away, but before she turned, she leaned in close to me, her voice dropping to a whisper that was pure venom. Stop talking to him, she hissed. You are just the help this weekend. Remember, go fix a toilet or something, and tell your staff to stop asking me for credit cards. It is tacky. Put it on the tab. The tab has limits, Leela, I said calmly. Not for me, she sneered. I am the bride, and soon I will be your boss, so get used to it. She spun around and dragged Owen toward the photographer, her white dress swirling around her ankles. I watched them go. Soon, I will be your boss. She really believed it. She had told the lie so many times it had become her truth. I went back to the office. Elena was waiting with a grim expression. What is it? I asked. She sent a document to Vivian, Elena said. It came through the guest Wi-Fi server logs. We intercepted the file attachment. Show me. Elena pulled up a PDF on the screen. It was titled, Memorandum of Understanding, Santalia Ownership Transfer. I opened it. It was a forgery, a bad one, if you knew what to look for, but convincing enough for a layperson. It had the villa's logo at the top, an old version of the logo we hadn't used in 5 years. It listed the sellers as Mark and Diane White. It listed the buyer as Lila White. The document claimed that Mark and Diane White were the sole beneficiaries of the Santa Leah Ancestral Trust, and that they were transferring their controlling interest to Lila White as a wedding gift, effective immediately upon the pronouncement of marriage. It was madness. My parents didn't own a brick of this place. They couldn't transfer what they didn't have. But Vivian didn't know that. Owen didn't know that. She is going to use this, I realized, staring at the screen. She is going to show this to Vivian tomorrow to prove she owns the place, get Vivian to sign the partnership check, and then what hope I don't notice, she thinks you are powerless, Elena said. She thinks you are just the bookkeeper who works for your parents. If the owners your parents say it is hers, then you have to obey. She is banking on my silence, I said. She thinks I will be too embarrassed to contradict my parents in public. She thinks I will just swallow it to keep the peace. Will you? Elena asked softly. I looked at the document. I looked at the forged signatures of my parents, which looked suspiciously like Lila's handwriting. I looked at the clause that granted Lila full executive control of all assets and revenue streams. Elena, I said, do we have a printer with the thick, bonded paper? The kind we use for the high-end menus? Yes. Print this forgery, I said. Print it out. And then, I want you to go into the safe and get the real deed. The one with the apostille stamp from the Italian government. The one that lists VSC Holdings as the owner. And get the corporate registration documents for VSC Holdings that list me, Claire White, as the sole director. You are going to show them. Not yet, I said. We are going to let her present her paper first. We are going to let her put it on the table. We are going to let her stake her entire life on that piece of paper. And then, I said, we are going to see which paper cuts deeper. I turned away from the screen. The trap was set. She had walked right into the cage and locked the door herself. Now, all I had to do was wait for morning. But the night wasn't over. My phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. Payment declined for the jazz band. Driver is asking for cash or he turns around. I looked at Elena. The band is at the gate. What do we do? Send Marco down with the petty cash box, I said. Pay them, but get a receipt. A handwritten receipt made out to Lila White. And make sure the band leader knows he is to announce a special thank you to the patron of the arts, Mrs. Lila Kensington, before every set. Why? Elena asked, confused. Because, I said, a cold smile touching my lips. I want everyone to know exactly who ordered the music when the silence finally falls. I walked out into the cool night air. The stars were out, indifferent and beautiful. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled the hour. Midnight was coming, and Cinderella was about to lose a lot more than a glass slipper. The rehearsal dinner was held on the upper terrace, a space I had designed to capture the exact angle of the sunset hitting the olive groves. It was meant to be a place of quiet reflection and intimacy. Tonight, however, it looked like a showroom for people who believed elegance was something you could purchase by the pound. The guests were a mix of Owen's old-money socialites who wore their wealth with bored indifference and Lila's influencer crowd, who wore their wealth like a costume they were terrified of ripping. I moved along the periphery, carrying a tablet as if checking inventory, invisible in my plain dress. I listened to snippets of conversation as I passed. A woman in a red Valentino gown was complaining that the cobblestones were ruining her heels, oblivious to the fact that the stones were 400 years old. A man with a linen suit was loudly explaining to a waiter that the Chianti was a bit aggressive, not realizing he was drinking a €20 table wine because Lila had burned through the premium stock 2 hours ago. So authentic, someone sighed. It feels so rustic. They used the word rustic to mean expensive but dirty. They wanted the aesthetic of Italy without the reality of it. They wanted the stone walls without the draft, the vineyard view without the smell of fertilizer. Lila was at the center of it all. Of course, she had changed into her third outfit of the day, a white jumpsuit with a cape that trailed behind her like superhero wings. Her phone was never more than 6 inches from her face. "Guys, look at this view," she said into her camera, panning across the terrace. "Living the dream. Some people are just too broke for Italy. But we are thriving." She laughed, that rehearsed, tinkling sound, and glanced directly at where I was standing near a pillar. The camera lens caught me for a split second, the drab sister in the shadows, before she whipped it back to her own glowing face. It was a calculated move. She was building a narrative for her followers, the successful, benevolent princess and the jealous, incapable troll. I checked the seating chart on my tablet. Originally, I was placed at table 4, with some of Owen's distant cousins. But when I approached the table earlier, I found my name card had been removed. I scanned the room and found it. Table 19. It was tucked away in the far corner, near the service entrance and the portable air conditioning unit that was rattling loudly. The other seats were occupied by the photographer's assistant, the band's sound engineer, and a freelance makeup artist who looked exhausted. "Staff and vendors," the placard read. Lila had sat her own sister at the vendor table. I walked over calmly. My parents were seated at the head table with the Kensingtons. I saw my mother catch my eye as I headed for the corner. She didn't wave. She didn't protest. She simply turned her head, engaging Vivian in a sudden, animated conversation about the floral arrangements. She was embarrassed, not of Lila's cruelty, but of me, in her mind. If I had just been more successful, more flashy, I wouldn't be sitting by the kitchen door. To Diane White, the seating chart wasn't an insult. It was a reflection of natural order. I sat down at table 19. The sound engineer, a guy named Marco, looked at me. "You the wedding planner?" he asked, tearing into a roll. "Something like that," I said, unfolding my napkin. "Bride's a nightmare, huh?" he grunted. She yelled at me because the microphone didn't make her voice sound velvety enough. "It's a mic, lady, not a magic wand." "She has high standards," I said neutrally, pouring myself water. From my vantage point, I had a perfect view of the high table. Vivian Kensington was not eating. She was watching. Her gaze wasn't on the bride, who was currently performing a toast to herself. Her eyes were fixed on me. Vivian was a predator, much like myself, but she operated in the open ocean while I preferred the reef. She saw me sitting next to the sound guy. She saw the humiliation intended by the seating arrangement. But what disturbed her, I could tell, was that I wasn't crying. I wasn't making a scene. I was eating my salad with perfect posture, cutting the lettuce with surgical precision. A servant who is humiliated acts ashamed. A person who owns the building just notes the service error. Vivian frowned, taking a sip of her wine. The math wasn't adding up for her. I finished my appetizer and stood up. I needed to check the final security sweep for the night. As I passed the main table, avoiding eye contact, I heard Owen's voice. He had had a few more drinks, and his volume control was slipping. "Lila, babe, seriously," he hissed. "I just got another alert. The transport company charged us €4,000. We are nearly double the original budget. Where is this money coming from?" Lila leaned in, stroking his arm, her voice a low, fierce whisper that she thought was private. "Stop panicking. Owen, it is an investment. Once the wedding is done, your mom buys the stake in the villa, and we are flush. We will have so much cash we won't know what to do with it." "But the stake," Owen slurred slightly. "Are you sure the paperwork is solid? Mom is going to want to see the deed tomorrow." "It is done," Lila snapped. "I told you. My parents signed it over. It is practically ours already. Why do you think I'm spending like this? I'm spending our own money." She kissed him on the cheek. A hard, silencing peck. "Now smile. People are looking." Owen smiled. But it looked like a grimace. He was terrified. He was a man standing on a trapdoor, holding a rope that was attached to nothing. I kept walking, my face impassive. She had just confessed the entire scheme. She was spending money she didn't have, banking on a fraudulent sale of a property she didn't own, to pay off the debts of a wedding she couldn't afford. It was a perfect circle of destruction. I found Elena in the hallway. She was holding a walkie-talkie, looking pale. "Status?" I asked. "The White Peacocks bit one of the guests," she said flatly, "and the jazz band is demanding overtime cash or they pack up right now." "Pay the band," I said. "Put the peacocks in the stable. And Elena." "Yes." "Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock sharp." Elena stiffened. "The contract room." "The contract room," I confirmed. "I want the long mahogany table cleared. I want the notary present. I want the head of security outside the door. And I want you to have the master file ready." "Who am I inviting?" Elena asked. "Vivian Kensington," I said. "Tell her the owner's representative is finally ready to review the partnership documents." "And the bride?" "No," I said. "Let Lila sleep. Let her have her beauty rest. She is going to need it." I went back out to the terrace. The party was winding down. The guests were drunk and happy, sedated by the expensive illusion I had allowed Lila to construct. Vivian Kensington stood up from the table. She didn't go to her room. She walked toward the edge of the terrace, pulled out her phone, and made a call. I moved closer, hiding behind a large potted lemon tree. "Charles," Vivian said into the phone. Her voice was ice cold. "I need you to run a search, right now. I don't care what time it is in New York." She paused, listening. "The Villa Santalia, Tuscany, San Lupo. I want to know who owns it. The bride claims it is a family trust under the name White, Mark and Diane White, or maybe Lila White." She tapped her foot on the stone. "Yes, I know what she said, but something feels off. The sister, the one they treat like a dog, she is too calm. She walks around here like she is inspecting the foundation, not attending a party. Just check the registry." There was a long silence. Vivian stared out at the dark hills. I held my breath. "What do you mean?" Vivian asked sharply. "VSC Holdings. Who is the principal?" She listened again. Her back went rigid. The hand holding the champagne glass tightened until her knuckles were white. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "Claire White, the sister sole director." She turned slowly, looking back at the party. She looked at Lila, who was dancing on a table, waving a napkin. Then she looked at my parents, who were clapping along, drunk on reflected glory. Then she looked for me. I stepped out from behind the lemon tree. I didn't hide. I stood in the half-light, wearing my plain dress and my dusty boots. Vivian saw me. Her eyes widened, then narrowed. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The humiliation, the lies, the game. She looked at her phone, then back at me. She didn't scream. She didn't storm over. She was a businesswoman. She recognized a fellow apex predator. She gave me a single, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a greeting. It was an acknowledgement. "I see you." I nodded back. "And I see you." She put the phone away and walked back toward her suite, her spine straight as a steel rod. She didn't say a word to her son. She didn't say a word to the bride. The trap wasn't just set anymore. The door had just slammed shut. I looked at Lila one last time. She was laughing, her head thrown back, shouting something about how good it felt to be rich. Laugh, Lila. I thought, laugh loud. Because tomorrow, the silence is going to be deafening. The rehearsal dinner had bled into the late-night rehearsal for the ceremony itself. The moon was high now, a stark white disk over the cypress trees, illuminating the main courtyard where the altar had been set up. The air had cooled significantly, but the tension was fever-hot. I stood by the stone archway, holding a bottle of water, watching the performance, and it was a performance. Lila wasn't just walking through the steps of her wedding. She was directing a scene in which she starred as the benevolent queen, and everyone else was a prop. "Okay, stop." Lila clapped her hands, the sound sharp in the quiet night. She pointed at the flower girl, Owen's 6-year-old niece. "You are walking too fast. It looks rushed. You need to glide, like you are floating on a cloud of money. Try it again." The little girl looked terrified. Owen rubbed his face with his hands. He looked exhausted. the earlier alcohol wearing off into a headache and a creeping sense of dread. "Lila, she is 6, Owen said softly. "It is fine. Can we just finish the run-through?" "It is not fine. Owen," Lila snapped, then immediately softened her voice when she noticed his mother watching. "I just want it to be perfect for us, baby, for our legacy." She turned to the small group of friends and family gathered on the sidelines. They were tired, too. Sipping the last of the wine, their laughter a little too loud, a little too forced. "You know how it is," Lila addressed the crowd, flashing a conspiratorial grin. "I have to be the perfectionist because no one else in my family has the eye for it. God knows if I left it to Claire, we would be getting married in a parking lot with plastic cups." A few of her friends giggled. My parents, sitting on the front bench, chuckled uncomfortably. My mother shot me a look that said, "Don't you dare say anything." I didn't. I just took a sip of water. Lila wasn't done. The adrenaline of the day, mixed with the champagne and the power trip of bossing around the staff, had made her reckless. She needed a punching bag to elevate herself, and I was the designated target. "Speaking of Claire," Lila said, her voice bright and carrying. She walked over to where I was standing in the shadows. She reached into her clutch a glittering, crystal-encrusted thing and pulled out a thick cream-colored envelope. The courtyard went quiet. "Claire," Lila said, holding the envelope out to me. "I was thinking, I know it was really hard for you to get here. I know you had to scrape together every penny and probably take some time off from whatever it is you do now." She paused for effect. The guests were watching, fascinated by the train wreck. "So, Owen and I wanted to give you this," she continued, her voice dripping with fake charity. "Consider it a little thank you for helping out with the little things today, fixing the lights, moving the boxes. It is a tip. Go buy yourself a nice dress for tomorrow so you don't look so utilitarian." She thrust the envelope at my chest. It was a tip. She was tipping me, her older sister, in front of her future in-laws, her friends, and our parents. I looked at the envelope. I could feel the cash inside, probably a few €100. "Enough to buy silence," she thought. "Enough to remind me of my place." My mother looked down at her lap. My father cleared his throat but said nothing. Owen looked like he wanted to vanish into the stone floor. I reached out and took the envelope. Lila smiled. A triumphant, predatory thing. She expected me to open it. She expected me to gasp, or cry, or stammer a thank you. She wanted the visual of me accepting her charity. Instead, I held it for a second, weighing it in my hand. It felt light. I didn't open it. I didn't look inside. I simply leaned over and placed it gently on the stone ledge of the archway next to me. I set it down with the same casual indifference one would use for a used napkin or an empty glass. Then I looked at her. "Thank you, Lila. You should get back to your rehearsal. You are losing the light." The silence that followed was suffocating. By not opening it, by not reacting to the money, I had stripped the gesture of its power. If I had thrown it back, I would have been the angry, jealous sister. If I had kept it, I would have been the needy charity case. By setting it aside unopened, I declared that her money was irrelevant to me. It was beneath notice. Lila's smile faltered. Her eyes narrowed. She didn't know how to handle someone who wouldn't play the game. Vivian Kensington, sitting 10 feet away, watched the envelope land on the stone. Her eyes snapped back to my face. I saw a flicker of calculation in her gaze. She saw a woman who didn't need money, and that terrified her more than anything. Owen stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the stone. "Lila," he said, his voice tight. "Can I talk to you?" "Now." Lila blinked, snapping out of her stare-down with me. "Not now. Owen, we have to finish the vows." "Now," Owen repeated. He didn't wait. He walked out of the courtyard circle, heading toward the side garden where the rosemary bushes grew thick and tall. Lila rolled her eyes at the guests. "Grooms," she sighed, trying to keep the mood light. "So nervous." She followed him. The guests began to murmur among themselves. My mother hurried over to me. "Why did you do that?" she hissed, gripping my arm. "She was trying to be nice. You embarrassed her." "I embarrassed her," I asked calmly. She handed me a tip in front of 50 people. Mom, I am her sister, not the valet. You need the money, my mother insisted, though her voice wavered. You should have just said thank you. You always have to be so proud. It is your worst trait. Is it? I asked. I thought my worst trait was my honesty. My mother let go of my arm as if burned. She backed away, shaking her head. I don't know what has gotten into you. I turned away from her and walked toward the side garden. I wasn't leaving. I was following the script. I knew exactly where Owen and Lila would be standing because it was the only secluded spot near the altar, and the acoustics of the villa meant that sound traveled up the curved stone wall perfectly. I stood on the other side of the hedge. I didn't need to see them. I could hear them as clearly as if they were standing next to me. What the hell was that? Owen's voice was shaking. Why do you treat her like that? She is your sister. Lila, you handed her cash like she was a stripper. I was helping her. Lila sounded defensive, shrill. She is broke. Owen, she needs it. Why are you defending her? She has been moping around all day, judging us. She hasn't said a word, Owen shouted, then lowered his voice. That is the problem. She doesn't say anything. She just watches. And you are obsessed with money. Every conversation today has been about cost, or value, or ownership. We are going to own this. We are going to buy that. Do you even care about the wedding, or is this just a business transaction to you? Don't be stupid, Lila snapped. Of course I care. But we have to be realistic. Owen, your mother expects a certain level. We have to secure our future. This villa is the key. The key to what? Owen asked. To debt. To lying to my family. I am not lying, Lila cried. I am securing the asset God. Owen, you are so soft. You don't understand how the world works. You have to take what you want. You have to project power. Is that what you are doing? Owen asked. Projecting power. Because it looks like you are bullying your sister to make yourself feel big. There was a silence. Then I heard Lila's voice, lower now, desperate and venomous. You don't get it, she hissed. I have to make them believe I am the one in charge. If they think Claire has any power, if they think she is anything other than a loser, the whole narrative falls apart. I have to make them believe I am the owner. Owen, I have to... Why? Owen asked. Why is it so important that you own it? Because if I don't, Lila whispered, then I am just a girl who spent $100,000 of your money on a party I couldn't afford, and your mother will eat me alive. I closed my eyes. There it was, the confession. She knew exactly what she was doing. She was terrified. Lila, Owen said, his voice sounding incredibly tired. I think we need to look at the contracts, the real ones, tomorrow. We will, she promised, her voice turning sweet again, manipulative. Tomorrow, after the wedding, everything will be fine. Just trust me. Do you trust me? There was a long pause. I want to, Owen said. It wasn't a yes. I stepped back from the hedge before they could see me. I walked back toward the courtyard, my heart beating a steady, cold rhythm. As I emerged from the darkness, I found my path blocked. Vivian Kensington was standing there. She was alone. The rest of the guests had drifted toward the buffet for late-night snacks. Vivian looked at me. The moonlight caught the sharp angles of her face. She looked like a statue of justice, only better dressed. Claire, she said. It was the first time she had used my name without a sneer. Mrs. Kensington, I replied. She took a step closer. She smelled of expensive Chanel and cold fury. I made a phone call tonight, she said, to a registry office in New York, and another one to a contact in Milan. I didn't blink. And they told me some very interesting things about VSE Holdings. She watched my face, searching for a reaction. I gave her nothing. I stood as still as the cypress trees. They told me, she continued, that the sole director of the holding company that owns this property is a woman named Claire White. But that can't be right, can it? Because the bride tells me Claire White is a destitute risk manager who can't afford a plane ticket. She waited. People say a lot of things, I said softly. Vivian let out a short, sharp breath. Stop playing games. I watched you tonight. I watched you with the staff. They don't look at you like you are a guest. They look at you like you sign their paychecks. I watched you fix the seating chart in your head. I watched you take that envelope and treat it like garbage. She stepped even closer, lowering her voice. Who are you? Really? I looked her in the eye. I decided to give her a crumb. Just a single crumb of truth to keep her hungry until morning. I am the person, I said, my voice clear and unwavering. Who is responsible when everything collapses? Vivian stared at me. She processed the words. She processed the implication. Collapses, she repeated. Is it going to collapse? That depends entirely on the structural integrity of the foundation, I said cryptically. And the foundation here is very porous. Vivian's eyes narrowed. She looked toward the garden where her son was arguing with my sister. She looked back at the villa, with its lights and its luxury. My son, she said, her voice hard, is a fool in love, but he is not a thief, and I will not have the Kensington name dragged through a mud pit of fraud. Then you should ensure you read the fine print, I said. Vivian nodded slowly. It was a pact, a silent agreement between two generals on a battlefield. Tomorrow morning, Vivian said, before the ceremony, I want to meet the owner, the real owner. I don't care if it is a corporation, a ghost, or you. I want to see the deed. 8 o'clock, I said. The conference room behind the library. I will be there, Vivian said. And if I find out that Lila has dragged us into a crime. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Good night, Mrs. Kensington, I said. Good night, Ms. White, she replied. The distinction was deliberate. Ms. White, not Claire, not the sister, an equal. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking sharply on the stone. I watched her go. Then I pulled out my phone. I typed a message to Elena. 8 o'clock tomorrow. Open the contract room. Prepare the main table. And Elena, bring the notary. I hit send. The rehearsal was over. The actors knew their lines. The audience was seated. Tomorrow, the curtain would rise, and I would finally take center stage. The morning of the wedding broke with a violence of activity that shattered the peace of the Tuscan dawn. By 7 o'clock, the villa was vibrating. Trucks were reversing into the service bays. Florists were screaming in Italian about the humidity wilting the hydrangeas. And a small army of hair and makeup artists had established a forward operating base in the bridal suite. I walked across the cobblestones of the lower courtyard, carrying my tablet and a heavy leather folder. The air was already warm, promising a day of heat that would test the temper of every person in formal wear. I was headed toward the main ceremony lawn to do a final check of the sprinkler systems. Something I did every morning to ensure the grass remained emerald green when a figure in a silk white robe stepped into my path. It was Lila. Her hair was currently in rollers, and she wore a pair of oversized sunglasses despite the fact that the sun had barely cleared the horizon. She looked frantic, her energy jagged and sharp. Where do you think you are going? She snapped, blocking the archway that led to the altar area. I need to check the irrigation pressure. Lila, I said calmly. If I don't, the grass might be damp for your guest's shoes. I don't care, she hissed, glancing over her shoulder to make sure none of her bridesmaids were watching. You are not going out there. I have photographers setting up the getting ready shots on the lawn. I don't want you lurching around in the background looking like a janitor. I looked down at my attire. I was wearing a crisp black blazer and tailored trousers, hardly a janitor's uniform. But to Lila, anything that wasn't designer couture was rags. It is a big lawn, Lila, I said. I can stay out of the frame. No, she said, crossing her arms. You are banned from the guest areas until the ceremony starts. And even then, I want you in the back row, way back, behind the pillar if possible. Staff should not be loitering where the cameras are. Staff. I looked at her. She was standing under an archway carved by a master stonecutter in 1650, an archway that I paid 12,000 euros to restore last year. She was standing on my land, barring me from my own property, to protect an image that was entirely fraudulent. Fine, I said. I will go to the back office. I have paperwork to catch up on anyway. Good, she said, dismissing me with a wave of her hand. Stay there, and tell the kitchen to send up more mimosas. The last batch was too pulpy. She turned and marched back toward the villa, barking orders into her phone. I didn't go to the kitchen. I turned and walked purposefully toward the east wing, to the heavy oak door that led to the private conference room. It was a space we rarely used for weddings. It was meant for business. It had soundproof walls, a long mahogany table that shone like dark glass, and an atmosphere that killed laughter. Elena was already there. She stood by the window, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. On the table, she had arranged the files exactly as I had asked. On the left, the Lila White file. It was thick, messy, and filled with the printed emails from the fake domain, the handwritten addendums, and the ledger of unpaid debts. On the right, the VSE Holdings file. It was slim, precise, and contained only the original deed, the corporate registration, and my identification. Is the notary here? I asked, closing the door and locking it. He is in the anteroom, Elena said, her voice shaking. Signor Rossi, he has his seal. Good. And security. Marco is outside. No one enters unless you say so. I looked at the grandfather clock in the corner. It was 2 minutes to 8. Sit down, Elena, I said. You have done your job. Now just witness. At exactly 8 o'clock, there was a firm knock on the door. Enter, I called out. The door opened, and Marco stepped aside to let them in. Vivian Kensington walked in first. She was wearing a structured gray suit that looked like armor. Her face was scrubbed of any emotion. Behind her walked a man I recognized, Arthur Pence, the Kensington family's personal attorney. He was carrying a briefcase and looking around the room with the skeptical eye of a man who billed $800 an hour. Vivian stopped at the foot of the table. She looked at Elena, then she looked at me. I was standing at the head of the table, my hand resting on the leather chair. Ms. White, Vivian said, you are punctual. Time is equity, Mrs. Kensington, I replied. Please, sit. Vivian sat on the right side. Her lawyer sat next to her, opening his briefcase and pulling out a yellow legal pad. My client has concerns regarding the chain of title for this property, Arthur Pence began, his voice dry and nasally. We have been led to believe that a transfer of ownership is imminent, or has already occurred, involving the bride. However, our preliminary search last night yielded conflicting results. Conflicting is a polite word for it, Vivian interrupted. She looked directly at me. Cut the chase. Claire, you told me last night you were the one responsible when things collapse. Well, I am looking at the cracks. Who owns this building? I didn't speak. I simply slid the slim file from the right side of the table across the mahogany surface. It stopped directly in front of Arthur Pence. Open it, I said. Arthur opened the folder. He adjusted his glasses. He read the first document, the deed of sale from the Count to VSE Holdings. He flipped to the second document, the corporate registry of VSE Holdings in Delaware. Listing the officers, he stopped. He looked closer. Then he looked up at me, his eyes widening slightly behind his spectacles. VSE Holdings, Arthur read aloud. Sole director and beneficiary, Claire Elizabeth White. Vivian inhaled sharply. She snatched the paper from her lawyer's hand and read it herself. She traced my name with her finger. You, she whispered. It is you. You aren't the manager. You aren't the bookkeeper. I am the owner, I said, my voice filling the room. I bought this villa 4 years ago. I restored it. I manage the holding company that operates it. Every stone, every tree, every bottle of wine in the cellar belongs to me. Vivian looked up, her face a mask of shock that was quickly hardening into anger. And Lila. The family trust, the inheritance. There is no trust, I said flatly. There is no inheritance. My parents are retired school teachers who live on a pension in Ohio. They don't own a timeshare, let alone a 16th century Italian villa. Arthur Pence was scribbling furiously on his pad. Then the contract for the wedding venue. Who signed it? I nodded to Elena. She slid the thick, messy file across the table. This, I said, is the documentation of the fraud. Arthur opened the second file. He pulled out the emails. You will notice, I said, walking around the table to point at the documents, that the approvals for this wedding came from an email address ending in https google.com/search QAS Villa Santelia Management.com. That domain was registered 90 days ago by Lila White, using a credit card registered to Owen Kensington. Vivian made a sound of disgust. She created a fake identity, I continued. She has been emailing herself. She sends a request to the fake address, approves it as Claire White, and then hands the printout to my staff, claiming she has owner authorization. Elena spoke up, her voice small but clear. We have over 40,000 euros in unapproved upgrades. Mrs. Kensington, the vintage cars, the white peacocks, the wine cellar access. She signed for all of it, claiming the owner, me, or rather, the fake me had waived the fees. Vivian was reading the emails. Her hands were shaking, just slightly. She told me, Vivian's voice was low, dangerous. She told me she was negotiating a buy-in. She sent me a memorandum of understanding last night. She wanted $2 million to consolidate the shares. She was selling you air, I said. She was going to take your $2 million, pay off the $40,000 she owes me, and then I don't know. Run hope I died. This is criminal, Arthur Pence stated, looking up. This is wire fraud, identity theft, grand larceny. Yes, I said. It is. The room fell silent. The weight of the deception was heavy in the air. Vivian wasn't looking at the papers anymore. She was looking at the wall. Her jaw set so hard I thought her teeth might crack. She was replaying every conversation, every brag, every moment Lila had sneered at me for being poor. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a commotion in the hallway. I don't care who is in there. Move. It was Lila. Marco, my security guard, was trying to hold her back, but Lila was fueled by the manic panic of a woman who senses her world dissolving. The handle turned violently, but the door was locked. Open this door, she screamed. Elena, I know you are in there. I need the seating chart. I looked at Vivian. Shall we? Vivian nodded. Open it. I signaled to Marco through the glass panel. He stepped back. I unlocked the door. Lila burst in. She was still in her robe, her hair half done, her face flushed with rage. What the hell is going on? She shrieked. Why is the door locked? I have been looking for Elena for 20 minutes. The florists are putting the roses on the wrong side of the arch and… She stopped. She saw Vivian. She saw Arthur Pence. She saw the piles of documents spread out on the mahogany table. And finally, she saw me, standing at the head of the table, not as her sister, but as the judge. The color drained from her face so fast it looked like a physical effect. Vivian, Lila stammered, her voice jumping an octave. I didn't know you were having a meeting. We have to get ready. The photographer is waiting. Sit down, Lila, Vivian said. She didn't shout. She didn't have to. Her voice was absolute zero. I can't, Lila laughed nervously, backing toward the door. I have hair and makeup. We are on a tight schedule. Sit down. Lila froze. She looked at me, her eyes pleading for help, for the sister she had bullied to suddenly become the sister who saved her. Claire, she whimpered. Tell her we are just sorting out the logistics. I didn't move. I didn't blink. Lila slumped into the chair at the foot of the table, the furthest spot from me. She pulled her robe tighter around herself, looking small and terrified. What is this? She whispered, gesturing to the papers. This, Vivian said, picking up the fake email printout. is a very interesting correspondence between you and yourself. Lila stared at the paper. She recognized it instantly. That is just a misunderstanding, she said, the lies spilling out automatically. Claire helps me with the coordination. Sometimes we share emails. It is just administrative. And the deed? Vivian asked, slapping her hand down on the VSE Holdings document. Is that administrative too? You told me your parents owned this place. You told me you were buying them out. You asked me for $2 million. Lila. They do, Lila cried, looking at me with wild eyes. Claire just manages it. She steals the credit. Mommy and Daddy told me it was ours. Liar, I said, the word cut through her hysteria. I bought this place 4 years ago, I said calmly. I paid for it with money I earned while you were maxing out credit cards in Tulum. Mom and Dad know I work in risk management. They don't know I own this because I knew that if they found out, you would try to do exactly what you are doing right now. You are jealous, Lila screamed, standing up, tears streaming down her face. That is what this is. You are jealous because I am getting married and you are alone. You want to ruin my day, Vivian. Don't listen to her. She is crazy. She has always been jealous of me. She turned to Vivian, reaching out a hand. Vivian, please, we are family. You know me. I wouldn't lie to you. Claire fabricated these. She is trying to blackmail us. Vivian looked at Lila's outstretched hand. She looked at it as if it were covered in sewage. Vivian said. Silence. The command was so sharp, so authoritative, that Lila's mouth snapped shut. I do not talk to people who sign fake papers, Vivian said, and I certainly do not do business with people who try to steal from my family. But the wedding, Lila sobbed. The guests are here. Owen is waiting. Vivian stood up. She gathered her purse. Owen is a grown man, Vivian said. He will survive a heartbreak. What he will not survive is a federal prison sentence for being an accessory to fraud. Lila turned to me, her face a mask of pure hatred. You did this. You planned this. You let me plan the whole wedding just to destroy it. I didn't plan your greed. Lila, I said. I didn't forge your signature. I didn't make you lie to your fiancé about who owned the ground he walks on. You did all of that. I just kept the receipts. I looked at the clock. It was 8:15. Here is the situation, I announced, my voice cool and professional. According to the terms of the venue contract, the real one, any misrepresentation of identity or unauthorized alteration of the premises is grounds for immediate termination. I placed my hand on the phone that sat on the table. I can make one call, I said. I can have security clear the grounds. I can have the vendors pack up. I can have the police waiting at the gate to discuss the 40,000 euros in theft of services. Lila gasped. You wouldn't? Mom and Dad are here. You would humiliate them. They humiliated themselves when they raised a thief, I said. I looked at Vivian. Or, I said, we can proceed, but under new management. The room hung in suspension. The cliff edge was right there. Lila was dangling over it, and I was holding the knife to the rope. The wedding, I said, looking directly at Lila, is technically cancelled, unless someone pays the bill, right now. The mid-morning sun hung heavy over the Tuscan valley, baking the limestone of the Villa Sant'Elia until it radiated a dry, ancient heat. The air smelled of expensive perfume, nervous sweat, and the thousands of white roses that were already beginning to droop slightly in the humidity. The guests were seated in rows of white Chiavari chairs on the main lawn. It was a sea of linen suits and designer silk, a congregation of people who were waiting for a show. They held their programs like fans, whispering behind them, their eyes darting around. They could feel the tension. It was vibrating in the ground beneath their feet. They knew something was wrong. The delay had stretched from 10 minutes to 30. But they were too polite, or perhaps too hungry for gossip, to leave. I stood at the back of the aisle, near the stone archway where the bride would make her entrance. I was no longer wearing the plain navy dress of the staff, nor the black blazer I had worn in the conference room. I had changed into a tailored white suit, sharp, architectural, and commanding. It was the kind of suit a CEO wears to a shareholder meeting where she intends to fire the board. Elena stood beside me, holding the portable payment terminal. Her hands were trembling, but her jaw was set. "Are you ready?" I asked her quietly. "I just want this to be over," she whispered. "It ends now," I said. The string quartet struck up the opening chords of Pachelbel's canon. The conversation in the crowd died down. Heads turned. Phones were raised. A forest of black rectangles ready to capture the fairy tale. Owen stood at the altar. He looked pale, sweating profusely in his tuxedo. He kept glancing toward the side entrance where his mother should have been seated, but Vivian's seat was empty. He looked like a man on a boat that had lost its anchor. Then, Lila appeared. Despite the screaming match in the conference room less than an hour ago, despite the tears and the terror, she had pulled herself together with the terrifying compartmentalization of a sociopath. She looked stunning. Her dress was a cloud of lace and tulle, costing more than my first car. Her makeup was flawless, hiding the red blotches of her earlier breakdown. She held her bouquet high, her chin tilted up, a smile plastered on her face that didn't reach her eyes. She stepped onto the aisle runner. The cameras flashed. She began to walk, slow and regal, soaking in the admiration. She was playing the role of her life. She was the princess. She was the owner. She was the winner. She passed the 3rd row, the 5th row. I stepped out from behind the archway and walked straight down the center of the aisle, moving faster than her, my heels clicking rhythmically on the stone path. I didn't stop until I was 3 feet in front of her, blocking her path to the altar. Blocking her path to Owen, the music faltered. The cellist trailed off with a screech. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd like a wave. Lila froze. Her smile cracked, revealing the snarl underneath. "What are you doing?" she hissed through her teeth, her voice low so the guests wouldn't hear. "Get out of my way. You are ruining the shot." I turned my back to her. I faced the guests. I faced Owen. I faced my parents, who were sitting in the front row, looking as if they had been struck by lightning. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice projecting clearly without a microphone. I had learned how to project in boardrooms filled with shouting men. A garden wedding was easy. "I apologize for the interruption." "Claire," my father stood up, his face purple. "Sit down. Have you lost your mind?" "Please remain seated, Mr. White," I said, not even looking at him. "This is a matter of venue administration." I turned back to Lila. She was trembling now, the bouquet shaking in her hands. "Lila," I said, loud enough for the first 5 rows to hear, loud enough for the camera on the phone of her best friend in the 2nd row to record. "We have a problem with the account. We can talk about this later," Lila whispered frantically, her eyes darting to Owen. "Please, just let me finish. I will pay you. I swear." "The venue policy is strict," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "Full payment is required prior to the commencement of the ceremony. Currently, there is an outstanding balance on the account due to unauthorized upgrades and third-party services booked under a fraudulent authorization." I signaled to Elena. She stepped forward, handing me the black ledger and the payment terminal. "The total outstanding balance," I announced, looking at the number one last time, "is 42,850 euros. The number hung in the air. The guests began to murmur. 42,000. It was a staggering sum for upgrades. "You are lying," Lila snapped. Deciding to go on the offensive, she stepped closer to me, trying to use her height and her dress to intimidate me. "This is a shakedown. You are trying to embarrass me because you are jealous. I already paid the venue fee." "You paid the base fee," I corrected. "You did not pay for the vintage cars that are idling outside. You did not pay for the white peacocks. You did not pay for the 3 cases of Brunello you drank last night. And you certainly did not pay for the exclusive rights to the property you claim to own." Owen stepped down from the altar. He walked down the aisle, ignoring the stairs. "Lila?" he asked, his voice cracking. "What is she talking about? You said it was handled. You said the family, you said the owners. I am handling it, Lila shouted at him, then turned her fury on me. You want money? Is that what this is about? You want your little commission? She let go of her bouquet with one hand and reached into the hidden pocket of her dress a custom edition she had bragged about for weeks. She pulled out a credit card. It was a sleek, black card. Here, she spat, thrusting the card at me. Take it, run it, take your 40,000, and then get off my property. She still said it. My property. I took the card. I looked at it. It wasn't hers. It was an authorized user card on an account that belonged to Mark White, my father. I looked at my father in the front row. He was sinking into his chair, looking like a man who wished the earth would swallow him whole. He knew what the limit on that card was. It was nowhere near 40,000 euros. Are you sure you want me to run this, Lila? I asked. This is the final attempt. Run it, she screamed, and then get out. I handed the card to Elena. Elena inserted the chip into the portable reader. The machine chirped. It began to process. The little spinning wheel on the screen turned. The entire garden held its breath. The silence was absolute. You could hear the bees buzzing in the lavender. You could hear the distant sound of a tractor in the valley. Beep, beep. The sound was harsh, mechanical, and final. Elena looked at the screen. She didn't have to say it. She turned the screen so Lila could see. Declined. Code 51. Insufficient funds. Lila stared at the screen. Her face went white, then red. Try it again, she demanded. The machine is broken. It is the signal out here. It is weak. The signal is full bars. Lila, I said. The money isn't there. Do it again, she shrieked, grabbing the machine from Elena's hand and jamming the card back in herself. She mashed the buttons. Beep, beep, declined. She stared at it, hitting the machine with the palm of her hand as if she could beat the money out of it. It works, she yelled at the air. It has to work. Daddy said he increased the limit. She spun around to look at our father. Daddy, tell her you fixed it. Mark White put his head in his hands. He didn't speak. He couldn't. The truth was stripped bare in front of the people he had spent a lifetime trying to impress. He was a retired teacher with a modest pension, not the wealthy patriarch Lila had painted him to be. He had given her everything he had, and she had spent it on flowers and lies. Lila looked at Owen. Owen, baby, give me your card. Just for now. I will pay you back. The transfer is stuck. You know how banks are. Owen looked at her. He looked at the frantic, desperate woman in the white dress who was begging for money in the middle of their wedding aisle. He looked at the credit card reader in her hand. You said, Owen started, his voice barely a whisper. You said you owned the venue. Lila, you said we didn't have to pay for any of this because it was family property. It is, she cried. It will be? Claire is just holding it hostage. I am not holding anything hostage, I said calmly. I am the owner of VSE Holdings. I am the landlord, and I am evicting a tenant who hasn't paid rent. I took the machine back from Lila's limp hand. The ceremony cannot proceed. I addressed the crowd. The contract is void. Due to non-payment and fraudulent misrepresentation, I ask that you please vacate the lawn. No, Lila screamed. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into the fabric of my suit. You can't do this. You can't cancel my wedding. Everyone is here. Look at them. You are ruining my life. You ruined it yourself, Lila, I said, pulling my arm away. You spent 6 months pretending to be me. You spent 6 months spending money that didn't exist. Did you really think you could walk down the aisle and just hope I wouldn't notice? I hate you, she sobbed, her face twisting into something ugly. I hate you. You have always been jealous. You are a sad, lonely, bitter bitch, and you want everyone to be as miserable as you are. The guests were standing up now. The murmurs had turned into loud whispers. Phones were recording everything. This wasn't a wedding anymore. It was a viral video in the making. Owen stepped back. He was looking at Lila like he had never seen her before. The illusion of the golden girl, the heiress, the perfect partner, it had all dissolved, leaving behind a terrified grifter in a borrowed dress. "Please," Lila moaned, turning to the crowd, arms outstretched. "Someone, anyone, it is just a misunderstanding. Please." She looked at her bridesmaids. They looked away. She looked at her influencer friends. They were looking at their phones, probably already unfollowing her. Then, movement from the back. Vivian Kensington had arrived. She walked onto the lawn, not from the guest entrance, but from the side path that led from the villa's offices. She walked past the rows of stunned guests. She walked past my weeping father. She walked past her son, who looked like a ghost. She stopped next to me. Vivian looked at Lila. She looked at the declined credit card reader in my hand. Then she looked at me. There was no warmth in her eyes. There was only business, cold, hard calculation. She realized exactly what was happening. The Kensington name was about to be destroyed. The video of her son's bride screaming at a credit card machine would be on the internet within the hour. The humiliation would be global. Vivian opened her purse. She pulled out a checkbook. "Claire," Vivian said. Her voice was calm, but it carried the weight of a gavel strike. "Mrs. Kensington," I acknowledged. "The amount?" Vivian said. 42,850. "And 10% for the late fee and administration costs," I added smoothly, totaling 47,135 euros. Lila gasped. "Vivian, thank you. Oh my God. Thank you, I told you. I told you it was just a mix-up. I will pay you back. I swear." Vivian didn't look at Lila. She kept her eyes locked on mine. She uncapped a fountain pen. "If I write this check," Vivian asked me, "what happens?" "If the check clears," I said, "the debt is settled. The civil complaint for theft of services is dropped. The police stay outside the gate." "And the wedding?" Vivian asked. I looked at Owen, standing broken at the altar. I looked at Lila, whose face was already brightening with renewed hope, her arrogance already starting to creep back in now that she thought she had been saved. "That," I said, "is not up to me. I just provide the venue. What you do with it is your business." Vivian nodded. She wrote the check. She signed it with a flourish. She tore it out of the book. Lila lunged forward, reaching for the check. "Oh, Vivian, you are an angel. I knew you would understand. We can start the music again. Everyone, sit down. It is fixed." But Vivian didn't hand the check to Lila. She handed it to me. I took it. I inspected the signature. I handed it to Elena. "Payment accepted," I said. Lila clapped her hands, turning to the musicians. "Okay, play. Play the song again. From the top, I want to walk down the aisle again." "Stop," Vivian said. The single word froze Lila in her tracks. "I paid the debt," Vivian said, turning to face the bride. "I paid it because I do not stiff vendors, and I paid it because I will not have my son arrested for your crimes." "Crimes?" Lila laughed nervously. "Vivian, don't be dramatic. It was just a billing error." "But," Vivian continued, her voice rising, cutting over Lila's babble, "if I am paying for this event, then I am the client, and as the client, I have conditions." She turned to me. "Ms. White?" Vivian asked. "Does the villa have a standard non-disclosure agreement, or perhaps an annulment of contract form?" "We have a full legal suite in the office," I replied. "Good," Vivian said. She turned back to Lila. "If you want this ceremony to proceed, if you want to marry my son today, you will sign a document right now." "Sign what?" Lila asked, her smile faltering again. "A post-nuptial agreement," Vivian said, "and a confession of financial fraud. You will acknowledge that the Kensington family has no liability for your debts. You will acknowledge that you have no claim to the Kensington estate, and you will acknowledge, in writing, that you do not, and never have, owned this villa." Lila stared at her. "Do you want me to sign that here now?" "Yes," Vivian said. "Right here, on the altar, instead of your vows." "But that is humiliating," Lila cried. More humiliating than your card being declined, Vivian asked. More humiliating than going to jail. Vivian looked at me. Claire, would you say the police are still an option? They are on speed dial, I said. Vivian looked back at Lila. Choice is yours, dear. Sign the paper and get the ring, or leave in a police car. Lila looked at Owen. Owen, do something. She is blackmailing me. Owen looked at his mother. Then he looked at Lila. Owen, Lila whispered. Owen took a deep breath. He looked at the woman he had loved, the woman he thought was a prize, and he finally saw the price tag attached to her soul. I think, Owen said, his voice shaking but gaining strength, you should listen to my mother. The cliff edge had crumbled. Lila was falling, and this time there was no net. The check from Vivian Kensington was in my hand. It was a piece of paper worth nearly 50,000 euros, warm from the heat of the day and the friction of the moment. It was the price of salvation for the Kensington reputation, and it was the price of a temporary reprieve for my sister. But a check does not erase history, and it certainly does not erase the liability of a liar. I handed the check to Elena, who placed it securely in the locked box she carried. Then I signaled Marco, my head of security. He stepped forward, carrying a clipboard with a document I had prepared the night before, just in case this exact scenario played out. I stepped closer to Lila. She was wiping her tears, her makeup smeared, already trying to pivot back into the role of the blushing bride. She thought the transaction was over. She thought money had fixed the problem, just like it always had when our parents bailed her out. Not this time. I have two options for you. Lila, I said, my voice low enough that only the people at the altar could hear me. Vivian, Owen, and the priest, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else on earth. Lila blinked, confused. Vivian just paid you. What more do you want? Option 1, I continued, ignoring her question. We process the payment, but before the music starts, before you say a single vow, you sign this document. It is a formal admission of fraud, identity theft, and unauthorized use of corporate assets. It also includes a clause that you will vacate the premises immediately after the reception, with no further claim to the property, the brand, or the family rate you promised your friends. Lila recoiled. I am not signing a confession at my own wedding. Then we go with option 2, I said, my voice dropping to absolute zero. I tear up this check. I hand it back to Vivian. I signal the police who are parked just outside the gate. We cancel the event right now. I have the guests escorted off the property, and you leave in handcuffs for theft of services over 40,000 euros. I looked at her. Choose, right now. Lila looked at Vivian, desperate for an ally. Vivian, tell her to stop. Vivian, Kensington did not look at me. She looked at Lila. Her face was not the face of a mother-in-law. It was the face of a venture capitalist who had just realized she bought a toxic asset. Sign it, Vivian said. Lila gasped. What? Sign the paper. Lila, Vivian repeated, her voice cutting through the humid air like a scalpel. I paid the money to keep my son's name out of the police blotter. I did not pay it to indulge your delusions. If you want to marry into this family, you start by admitting exactly what you are. But right here, Lila whispered, looking at the guests who were watching us with rapt attention. Right here, Vivian said, on the altar, consider it your first act of honesty. Elena stepped forward and held out the clipboard. She uncapped a heavy black pen. Lila looked at the pen. She looked at Owen. Owen was standing 3 feet away. He hadn't moved since the credit card was declined. He was staring at Lila, but his eyes were unfocused, as if he was trying to reconcile the woman he loved with the woman who was currently being blackmailed by her own mother-in-law and sister to avoid arrest. Lila pleaded softly. Owen didn't answer. He didn't even blink. Lila realized she had no leverage. She had no money. She had no power. She snatched the pen from Elena's hand. With a shaking hand, she scribbled her signature on the line. She pressed down so hard the tip of the pen almost tore the paper. There, she spat, shoving the clipboard back at Elena. Are you happy? Can we get married now? She turned to the priest, flashing a frantic, terrifying smile. Father, please, we are ready. She turned to the musicians. Music. Start the music. She reached out and grabbed Owen's hands. Her grip was tight, possessive. Owen, baby, look at me, she said, her voice high and breathless. It is over. It is handled. We can do this. Just look at me. I love you. We are going to have the best life. We are going to be so happy. She was acting. I could see the gears turning. She was trying to reboot the fantasy. She was trying to force the scene back on script through sheer force of will. Owen looked down at her hands gripping his. He looked at the white lace. He looked at the diamond ring he had bought her, a ring she had probably told him was too small. Then he looked at me. He saw the sister he had been told was a failure. He saw the woman who had just commanded a room of millionaires without raising her voice. He saw the owner of the ground he was standing on. Then he looked back at Lila. He pulled his hands away. The motion was slow, but it felt violent. Lila's hands fell to her sides, grasping at empty air. Owen, she whispered. I can't, Owen said. The two words were soft, but in the silence of the garden, they sounded like gunshots. Lila froze. What do you mean you can't? The check cleared. Owen, Vivian paid it. We are fine. I am not fine, Owen said. His voice gained strength. He took a step back, putting distance between them. You stood there, Owen said, pointing at the spot where the credit card machine had beeped. You stood there and you lied. You lied about the house. You lied about your family. You lied about the money. I did it for us, Lila screamed, abandoning the whisper. I did it so we could have a legacy. You did it for a show, Owen said. You did it because you wanted to own something, and when you couldn't own the house, you tried to own me. You tried to own my mother's money. He shook his head, looking at the signature on the confession Elena was holding. I watched you sign that paper, Owen said. You didn't even read it. You just signed it so you could keep playing the game. You don't care about the truth. You just care about the scene. Owen, stop it, Lila cried, reaching for him again. You are embarrassing me. I am saving myself, Owen said. He turned to the guests. He looked at his friends, his colleagues, his family. I am sorry, Owen announced, his voice breaking but loud. There will be no wedding. I cannot marry a fake contract. A collective gasp went up from the crowd, louder than the one before. Owen turned to his mother. Vivian nodded once. It was a nod of approval, a nod of respect. Let's go, Owen said to her. He didn't look back. He walked down the aisle, past the white roses, past the stunned guests, and out toward the gate. Vivian followed him, head held high, leaving the check behind as the price of her son's freedom. Lila stood alone at the altar. For a second, she was silent. Then, the reality hit her. The stage lights had been cut. The audience was leaving. The leading man had quit. No, she screamed. It was a primal, ugly sound. Owen, come back, you can't leave me. I am the bride. She fell to her knees, her expensive dress pooling around her on the stone. She beat her fists against the ground. It was a tantrum, pure and simple, a child realizing the world does not obey her. My parents, who had been paralyzed in the front row, suddenly sprang to life. But they didn't go to comfort their daughter. They turned on me. You, my father shouted, pointing a shaking finger at my face. You did this. Are you happy now? You destroyed her life? My mother rushed at me, her face twisted with a venom I had never seen before. You jealous, spiteful little witch. You couldn't stand to see her shine, you had to ruin it. How could you do this to your own sister? I stood my ground. I didn't flinch. I didn't do this, I said calmly. I just cashed the check. You are dead to us, my father yelled. I disown you. You hear me. You are not my daughter. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had let me pay his mortgage twice when he was short, the man who had let me fund his retirement account, all while praising Lila for simply existing. You can't disown me. Mark, I said, because I don't belong to you, and neither does this house. Vivian had paused at the gate. She turned back one last time. She saw my parents screaming at me. She walked back a few steps. Shut up, Vivian said. My parents stopped mid-scream. You two are repulsive, Vivian said. She looked at them with pure disdain. You raised a liar. You fed her delusions. And when she finally hit the wall of reality, you blamed the only person in your family who actually works for a living. She looked at me. You were right. Claire, Vivian said, you are the only one who handles the collapse. Good luck with the cleanup. She turned and left for good. I looked at my parents. Then I looked at Marco. Marco. I said, yes, Senora Escort, Mr. and Mrs. White off the property. Immediately, my father's jaw dropped. You can't be serious. We are your parents. You are guests, I corrected, and you are becoming disruptive. Please leave before I have Marco carry you out. Marco stepped forward, his hand resting on his radio. My parents looked at him, then at me. They saw the steel in my eyes. They realized, for the first time in their lives, that I held all the cards. They turned and fled. They grabbed their bags and ran after the Kensingtons, likely hoping to beg for a ride, hoping to salvage some scrap of dignity. I was left alone with Lila. She was still on the ground, sobbing into the stone. The guests were filing out, whispering, taking photos of the fallen bride. I walked over to her. I stood over her. Lila looked up. Her mascara was running down her face in black streams. She looked broken. Why, she whispered, why couldn't you just let me have this? You have everything. You have the money. You have the house. Why couldn't you just let me have the story? I crouched down so I was eye level with her. Because it wasn't your story. Lila, I said softly. I reached out and touched the lace of her dress. You laughed at me yesterday. I said, you stood in my courtyard and you laughed because you thought I was poor. You thought that because I don't wear the brand. I don't have the value. Lila stared at me, sniffing. But here is the thing, Lila, I continued. You spent your whole life trying to look rich. I spent my life trying to be free. I stood up, brushing the dust from my white suit. You think poverty is not having money, I said, looking down at her. But you are wrong. Poverty is needing an audience to feel alive. Poverty is needing a man to give you a name. I leaned in closer for the final blow. You laughed because you thought I was broke. But the only thing you are missing, Lila, is the ownership of your own life. And that is something I cannot buy for you. I turned my back on her. Marco, I said, once the guests are clear, escort the bride to the service gate. Call her a taxi. I walked away. I didn't look back at the sobbing heap of white tulle. I didn't look back at the ruined flowers. I walked straight to the operations office. I opened the door. The air conditioning hit me. Cool and clean. Elena was there, locking the check in the safe. She looked up as I entered. Is it done? She asked. It is done, I said. I walked over to the main calendar on the wall. It showed the entire weekend blocked out for Kensington White wedding. I picked up the eraser. With a single, steady motion, I wiped the board clean. The names vanished. The event vanished. The chaos vanished. Reset the schedule. Elena, I said, sitting down at my desk and opening my laptop. We have a corporate retreat coming in on Monday, and I want to check the inventory on the Brunello. I logged in. The screen glowed blue. The numbers were waiting. The drama was over. The stage was dark. And I was exactly where I belonged, in control. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from right now. Are you listening from a busy subway, a quiet bedroom, or maybe while working a shift like Claire? Let me know in the comments below so we can share our thoughts. Please don't forget to subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people.